She raised the woman who steadied the British monarchy, then stood exactly one step behind the throne and never once tried to step onto it. Her name barely makes the public record. Her spine is still inside it. Cecilia Nina Cavendish-Bentinck Bowes-Lyon was born a Cavendish-Bentinck, became a Bowes-Lyon by marriage, and from 1904 was the Countess of Strathmore and Kinghorne. She was the mother of Elizabeth Angela Marguerite Bowes-Lyon, later Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother, the maternal grandmother and godmother of Elizabeth II, and the woman who kept the vast Bowes-Lyon household moving long before anyone imagined that her daughter would become queen. Her influence didn't come through speeches, policy, or public intervention. It came through 10 children, 2 great family homes, a disciplined Christian household, wartime hospital work, and losses that would have broken a less durable family. Cecilia never held the crown, yet the habits associated with the 20th century monarchy, service without display, private feeling under public restraint, faith, family routine, and composure in crisis, were practiced in her home before they were seen from a palace balcony. She was born on the 11th of September 1862 in Belgravia, in the Westminster district of London. Several later accounts identify 50 Eaton Place as the address, but the secure fact is Belgravia itself. Her father, the Reverend Charles William Frederick Cavendish-Bentinck, died in 1865, when Cecilia was still a small child. Her mother, Caroline Louisa Burnaby, raised a daughter with connections to the Cavendish-Bentinck and Wellesley families, but Cecilia's adult life wouldn't be defined by genealogy. It would be defined by the house she built around herself. At 18, on 16th of July 1881, she married Claude George Bowes-Lyon, Lord Glamis, at St. Peter's Church in Petersham, Surrey. William Shawcross records that her cousin, the 6th Duke of Portland, gave her away, followed by what Lord Strathmore remembered simply as cake and lunch. The wording suits Cecilia's story. No grand political alliance, no court spectacle. A church, a family meal, and a young woman entering an old Scottish dynasty. Claude was the heir to the Strathmore title, not yet the Earl. Cecilia was Lady Glamis after the wedding. In February 1904, when Claude inherited the earldom from his father, she became Countess of Strathmore and Kinghorne. The style changed, her work didn't. The Bowes-Lyons moved between Glamis Castle in Angus, pronounced Glams, and St. Paul's Waldenbury in Hertfordshire. One was an ancient Scottish castle with a history stretching back centuries. The other was an English country house, surrounded by formal gardens, long-clipped hedges, ponds, and avenues. Their children grew up between those two worlds, Scotland's inherited stone and Hertfordshire's ordered landscape. Cecilia made both homes into working family centers. 10 children were born to Cecilia and Claude between 1882 and 1902. Their eldest, Violet Hyacinth, arrived on 17th of April 1882. Mary Frances followed in 1883. Patrick came in 1884. Then John in 1886. Alexander in 1887, Fergus in 1889, Rose in 1890, Michael in 1893, Elizabeth in 1900, and David in 1902. That sequence matters because it corrects one of the persistent errors in retellings of the Queen Mother's childhood. Elizabeth Angela Marguerite Bowes-Lyon, born on 4th of August 1900, wasn't Cecilia's youngest child. She was the 9th of 10 children, the 4th daughter, and the youngest daughter. Her younger brother David was born on 2nd of May 1902. The future Queen Mother arrived after a gap of nearly 7 years since Michael's birth in October 1893. By then, Cecilia had already experienced the first catastrophe, that would shape the emotional weather of the family. On 17th of October, 1893, Violet Hyacinth Bowes-Lyon died of diphtheria. She was 11 years old. Violet was buried at St. Andrew's Church in Ham, Surrey, near Petersham, not at Glamis. Her father wouldn't become Earl until 1904, so she wasn't, in her lifetime, Lady Violet, despite the title often given to her retrospectively. A child's death from diphtheria wasn't unusual in Victorian Britain. That does not make it small. Violet was the first of Cecilia's 10 children to die, and the family record from then on carries a harder edge. The future Queen Mother would be born less than 7 years after Violet's death, into a home where grief had already taken a permanent place at the table. We can't read Cecilia's private mind from that fact. No surviving letter in the available record allows us to declare that Violet's death transformed her character in one dramatic instant. But the chronology is clear. Cecilia raised children after the death of a daughter. She would later lose 3 more children before her own death. Endurance wasn't an abstract virtue in that household. It was a daily requirement. The Countess's reputation among biographers rests on household authority rather than court glamour. One account calls her the heart and soul of the family. Another notes her special attention to her children's Christian upbringing. She played the piano, embroidered, gardened, hosted, and managed large estates. Those details can sound decorative until we recognize what they meant in a family of 10. Meals arranged, servants supervised, illnesses handled, education organized, correspondence answered, visitors received, faith taught, and a household rhythm maintained across 2 large properties. Cecilia's homes weren't merely residences, they were systems. At St. Paul's Walden Bury, a house set within more than 50 acres of formal and woodland gardens, children had routines before they had public roles. At Glamis, ceremony and history surrounded them, but their mother's emphasis was domestic. Cecilia preferred family life over public prominence. Her daughter Elizabeth's childhood was shaped by that atmosphere. Dogs, ponies, outdoor pursuits, books, scripture, music, and a secure sense that home was the center of the world. One description of young Elizabeth's morning routine gives us a rare, concrete image. Her day began by running into her mother's room, where they read a passage from scripture together. Then Fräulein Kubler gave her a piano lesson. That record belongs specifically to Cecilia and her daughter Elizabeth, not directly to Elizabeth II. It matters because it shows the household pattern that Cecilia created. Faith before the day's work, music as discipline, education close to family life rather than separated from it. The routines were modest. Their repetition gave them force. A modern monarchy is often imagined as a machine built inside palaces, among courtiers and constitutional papers. The Bowes-Lyon example points somewhere earlier and quieter. Before Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, became a national symbol, she was one of Cecilia's children, raised in a large home shaped by prayer, music, outdoor life, duty, and the expectation that private feeling didn't excuse one from responsibility. There is one subject that repeatedly distracts attention from that reality: the allegation that Cecilia wasn't Elizabeth's biological mother. It began not in the Edwardian period, not in a contemporary family document, and not in an official record. In 2012, Lady Colin Campbell published a claim that Elizabeth and David Bowes-Lyon had been born to the family's French cook, Marguerite Rodier, rather than to Cecilia. Campbell described the alleged arrangement as an early form of surrogacy. The theory drew on circumstantial fragments. A cook named Marguerite Rodier appeared in the household census. Elizabeth's middle name was Marguerite. The Queen Mother was sometimes known by the childhood nickname Cookie, and there was delay around the registration of Elizabeth's birth. but those fragments don't outweigh the established documentary record. The royal household identifies Elizabeth as the 9th child and 4th daughter of Lord and Lady Glamis. Her birth was registered on 4 August 1900. The precise physical location has been debated. St. Paul's Waldenbury, near Hitchin, is recorded in census material and on the birth registration, while later accounts sometimes say London. But no credible record names Marguerite Rodier as Elizabeth's mother. The same applies to David, born in 1902. There is no supplied documentary evidence naming Rodier as his mother either. Royal biographer Hugo Vickers dismissed the claim as complete nonsense. He added that one only had to compare photographs of Cecilia and the Queen Mother to see that they were blood relatives. Portraits aren't legal proof. Family resemblance can never substitute for documentary evidence. Yet the visual comparison is striking. The face shape, the eyes, the composed expression, the same impression of contained warmth. More important are the records: birth registration, census evidence, christening documentation, and the consistent account of parentage accepted by mainstream biographers and the royal household. The Rodier story does not reveal a hidden truth about Cecilia. It reveals how easily a quiet woman can disappear behind a louder theory. Cecilia's real life was more demanding than the invention. By the time Elizabeth was born in 1900, she had already spent 18 years raising a family that would eventually number 10 children. She had lost Violet. She had navigated births, illness, education, deaths, estate responsibilities, and the social demands placed on the wife of a Scottish earl. Then came war. Britain declared war on Germany on 4 August 1914, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon's 14th birthday. For the teenage girl later known as the Queen Mother, the First World War didn't arrive as distant news. It entered the rooms of Glamis Castle. The castle became an auxiliary convalescent hospital for wounded soldiers, affiliated with Dundee War Hospital. The Great Table was removed, a place designed for family meals, estate gatherings, and inherited ceremony was reorganized for men returning from war injured enough to need recovery, but not yet able to return home or to service. Cecilia took an active role in the hospital's work. The available record does not allow us to assign her a clinical qualification or invent particular nursing procedures. It does show that she helped organize and support the hospital until illness eventually interrupted her work. Her daughter Elizabeth also worked alongside volunteers at Glamis. She was a teenager. She helped with hospital work among wounded servicemen in the rooms of her childhood home. That detail reaches far beyond a charming royal anecdote. The future Queen Mother didn't first encounter service after becoming Duchess of York in 1923, Queen in 1936, or a wartime symbol during the Blitz. She saw it as a girl, in the family house, under the direction of her mother. The Great Table had been moved. Wounded men occupied the castle. The household had been repurposed around need. This was the model Cecilia gave her daughter. Privilege didn't exempt a family from service. It gave them space, resources, and therefore obligations. War also tested Cecilia in a more brutal way. Her sons went into uniform. Fergus Bowes-Lyon, born on 18 April 1889, served in the 8th Battalion of the Black Watch. He held the rank of captain. 10 weeks later, on 27 September 1915, Fergus was killed at Luce-en-Gohelle in France during the Battle of Luce. He was 26 years old. The fighting centered in part on the Hohenzollern redoubt, a fortified German position. Accounts associate Fergus with the attack there, though the exact tactical language should be handled with care. What is secure is the date, the regiment, the battle, and the consequence. Captain the Honorable Fergus Bowes-Lyon of the Black Watch died in action. He left behind a widow and an infant daughter. His burial story carried its own long aftermath. Fergus was originally buried near Vermel, but the exact location of his grave later became uncertain. In 2012, family records helped the Commonwealth War Graves Commission identify the site more precisely. He is buried in Quarry Cemetery, Vermel, France. For Cecilia, the war was no patriotic backdrop. It had taken a son. Michael Bowes-Lyon, born on 1 October 1893, was also caught by the war. He was wounded and held in German captivity as a prisoner of war. Details of his camp history are less secure than the broad fact of captivity, but the family knew that one son was dead and another had disappeared into enemy hands. The uncertainty mattered. A death notice ends one kind of torment. A missing son creates another. By the end of the war, the Bowes-Lyon household had been changed by military service, hospital work, bereavement, and captivity. The future Queen Mother had seen all of it before she turned 20. Her later wartime public image would become famous. The Queen who refused to leave London during the Blitz. The woman who visited bombed districts, factories, hospitals, and troops. The consort who stood beside George VI when the monarchy itself needed to prove its relevance. That public courage had many sources: her husband, constitutional duty, the crisis of abdication, the Second World War, and her own formidable temperament. But its domestic rehearsal had taken place at Glamis. The daughter who helped in a convalescent hospital beside Cecilia would one day become the mother of Elizabeth II. In that sense, Cecilia's influence wasn't a straight line from grandmother to sovereign. It passed through Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, the Queen Mother, who carried the emotional habits of her childhood into the royal family she created with George VI. Loss kept arriving. Alexander Francis Bowes-Lyon died on 19 October 1911, aged 24. Fergus died in 1915. John Herbert Bowes-Lyon, known as Jock, died on 7 February 1930, aged 43. Violet had died in childhood in 1893. By the time Cecilia died, she had outlived 4 of her 10 children. That is the tragedy in her story. Not a secret scandal, not a missing diary with some withheld confession. 4 children died before she did. 1 died from diphtheria at 11. 1 died young of illness. 1 was killed in the First World War. Another died in middle age. Her family contained abundance and grief in equal measure. A biographical account describes those losses as wounds that never healed, while crediting them with giving Cecilia unusual sympathy and understanding. That is interpretation, not a statement in her own hand. But it fits the life we can document. She continued to hold the household together through repeated losses, and her daughter emerged with an unusual capacity for sympathy without emotional collapse. The family didn't remain frozen in mourning. In October 1921, Cecilia underwent a hysterectomy for cancer. By May 1922, she had recovered sufficiently to take part in family occasions. She had survived illness, raised 10 children, endured wartime bereavement, and continued to oversee the domestic world that held the Bowes-Lyons together. In April 1923, her daughter Elizabeth married Prince Albert, Duke of York, at Westminster Abbey. The wedding placed Cecilia visibly close to the royal family. A formal portrait from the day shows the Duke and Duchess of York with both sets of parents, King George V and Queen Mary on one side, Claude and Cecilia, the Earl and Countess of Strathmore, on the other. Cecilia is there, but not as a public character in the drama. The young couple were the story. The future king and queen were the story. Cecilia stood in the parents' place, essential, dignified, and secondary. Albert and Elizabeth weren't expected to become king and queen when they married. Albert was the second son of George V. His elder brother, the Prince of Wales, was heir to the throne. That assumption collapsed in December 1936 when Edward VIII abdicated. Albert became George VI. Cecilia's daughter became Queen Elizabeth. At the age of 74, Cecilia was now the mother of the Queen Consort and the maternal grandmother of the heir presumptive, Princess Elizabeth. Yet the change didn't turn her into a public royal operator. There is no evidence that she became a constitutional advisor, a political actor, or a figure who sought a place in the machinery of monarchy. She remained the Countess of Strathmore, close to the crown by family connection and distant from it by temperament. That distance wasn't a weakness, it was part of her value. By the time Princess Elizabeth was born on 21st April 1926, Cecilia had already spent 44 years creating the family environment from which the Queen Mother emerged. The baby was born at 17 Bruton Street in Mayfair, London, the home of her maternal grandparents, the Earl and Countess of Strathmore. Cecilia wasn't merely related to the infant, she was her godmother. Princess Margaret Rose followed on 21st August 1930. The two royal granddaughters spent time in the homes of their maternal grandparents, including Glamis Castle and St. Paul's Waldenbury. The royal household records those places as part of Princess Elizabeth's early family life. That gives us the proper frame for Cecilia's relationship with Elizabeth II. We can document that Cecilia was grandmother and godmother, that Elizabeth II spent time at Glamis and St. Paul's Waldenbury, and that both places were central to the childhood of the Queen Mother. We can document Cecilia's religious seriousness, her music, gardening, domestic authority, hospitality, and active wartime service. We can document the emotional terrain through which her daughter had grown up. We can't honestly claim that Cecilia personally designed Elizabeth II's 70-year reign. No single letter proves that the Queen's later composure came from one grandmother. Elizabeth II was also shaped by George VI, by Queen Elizabeth, by constitutional training, by the abdication, by the Second World War, by religion, tutors, institutions, and a temperament that was unmistakably her own. But families don't pass down only titles, land, and portraits. They pass down standards. Cecilia's standard was visible in the structure of the home. Christian instruction wasn't performed for cameras. Music wasn't a branding exercise. Walks, gardens, reading, work, service, hospitality, and privacy weren't royal public relations. They were ordinary patterns repeated across years. Those patterns gave the Queen Mother a language for life before she had a public platform. She understood that a household could absorb stress without becoming chaotic. She had watched her mother reorganize a castle for wounded men. She had lived through the death of siblings. She had known that grief didn't erase duty. When the Queen Mother raised Elizabeth and Margaret, she brought that maternal culture into the York household. The connection is clearest in the nature of the Queen Mother's public role. She was warm but disciplined. She had a gift for making formal occasions feel human. She showed affection easily, yet understood that royal emotion had to be measured. During the Second World War, she became a potent symbol of shared national endurance. But the raw materials of that role, service, steadiness, religious conviction, domestic confidence, and courage under private strain, had been present in Cecilia's household decades earlier. The young Queen Mother had learned them at Glamis and St. Paul's Waldenbury. Elizabeth II inherited that maternal environment alongside the formal burden of monarchy. She grew up in a family that had already experienced a sudden constitutional crisis when Edward VIII abdicated. Her father became king unexpectedly. Her mother moved from Duchess of York to Queen Consort. Her own life shifted from relative privacy to preparation for a throne. The habits Cecilia had cultivated didn't remove the strain. They gave the family a way to carry it. Queen Elizabeth II became known for restraint, continuity, religious faith, an intense sense of duty, and an ability to maintain institutional stability through decades of public change. None of that can be attributed to Cecilia alone. But Cecilia's life helps explain the maternal world from which the queen emerged. A world in which responsibility was expected to continue through illness, bereavement, and uncertainty. One biographer's description of Cecilia as the heart and soul of the family may sound sentimental until the scale is restored. 10 children, 2 major estates, 1 daughter dead at 11, 1 son dead at 24, 1 son killed in France at 26, 1 son held prisoner in Germany, a castle converted into a hospital, a major operation in 1921, a daughter married into the royal family in 1923, 2 royal granddaughters born in 1926 and 1930, a son-in-law made king after an abdication in 1936. This wasn't a gentle life sheltered from history. It was history absorbed at the domestic level. Cecilia's garden work at Glamis offers a small image of that approach. Secondary accounts credit her with creating or shaping the Italian garden there, while a formal Dutch garden was begun in 1907, but reportedly abandoned when funds ran out. The details of design authorship aren't complete enough to call her the sole creator. Yet the association is fitting. In a medieval castle, she cultivated ordered spaces, paths, geometry, planting, care, and patience. That was her broader work, too. She didn't control the storms. She built routines that allowed people to live through them. Her daughter's rise to queenhood after 1936 could have made Cecilia a figure of public fascination. Instead, she continued to occupy the background. Her own reported response during the abdication crisis, when asked for a photograph, was blunt. "I shouldn't waste a photograph on me." The line is unusually revealing because it runs against the modern expectation that proximity to royalty must create appetite for fame. Cecilia didn't seem to want to turn her daughter's sudden elevation into a public role for herself. She had already done the work that mattered to her. She had raised the woman the country would soon know as Queen Elizabeth. The final chapter came quickly. In April 1938, Cecilia attended the wedding of her granddaughter, Anne Bowes-Lyon, to Thomas Anson, Viscount Anson, pronounced Viscount Anson. During or in connection with that wedding, she suffered a heart attack. She didn't die there. She lived for another 8 weeks. On 23 June 1938, aged 75, she died at 38 Cumberland Mansions on Bryanston Street in Marylebone, London, where most biographical accounts place her final residence. She had outlived 4 of her 10 children. 4 days later, on 27 June, Cecilia was buried at Glamis Castle. The return to Glamis has a quiet precision. Her daughter was queen consort. Her granddaughter was now heir presumptive to the throne. The British monarchy had become a larger public institution than Cecilia could have imagined in 1881 when she married Lord Glamis at Petersham. Yet her burial wasn't at Westminster Abbey, Windsor, or a royal chapel. It was at Glamis, the castle where the great table had been removed for wounded soldiers, where the future Queen Mother had helped with hospital work as a teenager, where family life had continued through war and mourning, where a countess had spent decades making inherited grandeur serve the needs of ordinary days. Cecilia never saw Elizabeth II become queen in 1952. She never saw the coronation in 1953. She died 14 years before the accession and 15 years before the coronation. But Elizabeth II didn't arrive at the throne empty of family memory. She carried the influence of a mother who had been raised by Cecilia, and she had known Cecilia herself as grandmother and godmother in the Bowes-Lyon homes of her childhood. The modern monarchy's steadiness wasn't only trained beneath a crown. Part of it was practiced in a Scottish household by a woman history nearly erased. A mother who taught faith without publicity, service without performance, and endurance without demanding applause. Cecilia stood one step behind the throne because she never wanted to stand on it. Her legacy wasn't a public intervention, a constitutional role, or a scandal. It was a household practice. The family held together, the wounded given rooms, the dead mourned, the children taught, the duties completed, the next day begun. At Glamps, beneath the stone weight of an old castle, that quiet work became a family inheritance.